Hi, friends. I'm Olivia. This is AV Club, where I usually talk about horror and literary fiction. And today I'm doing a horror book review of Bat Eater by Kylie Lee Baker. I took some notes on it while I was reading it, and I'm so excited to talk about it because I think that it's going to be a book that a lot of people are talking about this year. I think in Australia it's just called Bat Eater, but it's subtitled other names for Cora Zeng, who is the main character of this book. She is a Asian American woman living in New York City right at the beginning of COVID. At the beginning of the novel, Cora sees her sister being pushed in front of a train by an unknown assailant who calls her a bat eater, as he does it, as like a racialized epithet having to do with COVID and the pandemic. Her sister passes away. It is extremely traumatic for her. She starts working as a crime scene cleaner in Chinatown, which is owned by her friend's uncle. She's working with other Chinese Americans. And it seems that there is a serial killer in Chinatown, that they're keeping these unsolved murders of these Chinese Americans, other Asian Americans being killed in very horrific and gory ways, with dead bats being found on the scene. That there's definitely a racial element to why this is being done. It's kind of an interesting job for Cora because she is a big germaphobe. I think it's just one of the ways that her anxieties manifest. And it's the worst possible time to be a germaphobe. Maybe she feels a little bit more control over it because they're working with these heavy duty materials and cleaning fluids, that she gets to, wear this like full body suit to protect herself during the day and strip off at night and leave the day behind her. But she is both having a very hard time at her job as well as dealing with the loss of her sister. Her and her sister had had kind of a complicated relationship where it was always feeling like they were being pitted against each other, or that they were in competition with each other in ways, especially because they had different mothers who raised them in different ways. She also feels like her sister was maybe the more beautiful sister. So there's just a lot of feelings to work through and a lot of trauma to work through. This is my first book to read by Kylie Lee Baker, and it is really interesting to me that this is a horror debut because it is so well done. I think that this is like my horror book to beat for the year so far. And one of the reasons for that is that it doesn't limit itself to one type of horror, that there is so much going on in this book. That there is the serial killer in Chinatown and this like really physical, gross, gory horror going on. And there are some death scenes in this that, like, I've read a lot of stuff and they surprised me and they grossed me out and they horrified me, which I feel like is hard to do at this point, but they really were surprising. As well as there's the very real horror of racism in this book. A lot of this book takes place on the streets of New York City, walking around in Chinatown, etc., and that she feels like these racist attacks, like the one that happened to her sister and the ones that are happening to these people in Chinatown, could be next. That it's like this like constant jump scare of how racism is going to rear its violent head, and it does to her in this book in like the form of like microaggressions, but also real assault and things that make her very uncomfortable. There's also the jump scare of that it is COVID-19. It's like it starts at the very beginning of the pandemic, and when her and her sister are walking, like, whenever this thing is over, thinking it's just going to be like a couple of weeks. And then so it's getting worse and worse throughout the story. Like, she feels like horror is everywhere sneaking up on her because there's germs everywhere and she doesn't want to get sick. And it's just the like one of the only things that she really has control over. And then I think that the most original part of this book is that it has a lot to do with Hungry Ghost, and the Hungry Ghost Festival is going on throughout the story. I believe it is across July. I believe this is like a pan-Asian holiday. This is something that I should do more research on, but it reminded me a lot of playing Ghostwire Tokyo, and the type of like ghost hauntings that are going on in that, and just the way that the ghosts are described is so creepy, so creepy. Some of the weirdest stuff that I've read, and just like very able to visualize all this weird, horrible stuff going on because like it is scary, but these ghosts are also like kind of traumatized souls. And so just the way that that's all done is so interesting to me and is like really what set this over the edge for me as being like a favorite book because of how crazy the serial killer stuff was, as well as how well the supernatural elements were done. And this is, it's really interesting because it reminded me of like Mark Fisher's book, The Weird and the Eerie, where he talks about the weird being stuff like you actually see and is more like physical and tactile, and eerie is kind of like the loss of stuff and like the absence of stuff that should be there. And I feel like this book really excels because is able to do both of those things. That it, I think, is a horror that would satisfy a lot of people because it fulfills a lot of those elements without feeling overwhelmed or rushed or overloaded. Really, the themes of this make it all very cohesive and bring it all together. Like it works really well. There's not too much going on. I also feel like the social commentary aspects of this book were really well done. I feel like the commentary hit the right tone of literalism, that it wasn't overly literal where it was translating every kind of microaggression into some horror element, because the racism is very overt in this book and racism isn't subtle or needing like isn't necessarily needing this um translation, and that's how you're talking about it. The racism is a part of the story that's very real and is affecting like how she's going throughout the world, but also there's a big part of this book that is her managing her grief over the loss of her sister and why that happened, and feeling like she's failed her sister even though they have this complicated relationship, because she felt like at the time during the pandemic that she wasn't able to mourn her sister in the right way, and that her sister is her soul is lost in the afterlife, and is unfulfilled. And then the way that the plot progresses to like find out who the serial killer is and how that's done, she has this like friendship group with the other crime scene cleaners that's, I think, really special, really well done. They all have very distinct personalities and degrees of likability. The book is also funny, like the conversations feel so real, and like the humor that's built in between the characters is real and believable. It was just such a cohesive work and I'm so excited. I am going to check in to see like if Kylie Lee Baker, I think her other books that have already been published are fantasy. So I'm going to check in to see if that might be something I'll be interested in. But I really hope she writes more horror because she did it so well. This is like something that could be adapted for the screen so well, especially like I think like a movie could be so well done. And so I hope that we do get to see that because I feel like it was just like a really original horror story that didn't remind me of anything else I'd seen before. And it's really, I think, amazing like how it was able to balance like these real world horrors, the supernatural religious horrors, um, without it becoming too chaotic. You always know where you are in the scene and it always makes sense. Nothing is like just coming out of nowhere. I Yeah, I think this is my horror book to beat from the year. And last year when I said that about a book that was from the kind of perspective of a serial killer eating eyeballs, I was right then too that it was my horror book of the year. So I would love to be beaten. Like I would love to keep reading some good horror books this year. Um but yeah, I really loved this one. I hope that people are reading it. From what I see, whenever people are reading it, that they're loving it. And yeah, I can't wait to see what else she writes in the future. But yeah, if you liked reading this, then I would check out Ghostwire Tokyo. Like if you want more of the hungry ghost, Ghostwire Tokyo is set in Tokyo, and it's this really beautiful narrative story about family, actually about the loss of a sister as well. So I would check that out if you're into video games at all, or even if you're not, if you want more of the story ASAP, that might be something that you'd be interested in. Thank you for joining me today. I will be back soon to talk more about horror fiction, literary fiction, etc. Talk to you soon. Bye.